Hi guys, and welcome back to story time. I hope you're really well, and I hope you've had a good week so far. We are back with Guardians of Magic, and we are now on chapter 10. So let's remind ourselves what happened in the previous chapter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the last paragraph and then go straight into chapter 10, okay? Just then a Tin Man turned from the crowd closest to the cat orchestra and began walking along the row. Phoebe stiffened, and on either side of her Sydney, Ernest, and young Possum did the same. The Tin Man's eyes glowed as he looked into each cat's face in turn. Phoebe's grip on her instrument case tightened. The Tin Man was almost level with her. She looked up into its glowing eyes. Chapter 10. Phoebe listens. As Phoebe looked into the Tin Man's glowing eyes, and they grew dim, flickered, and abruptly went out. The Tin Man stood motionless, its head tilted down towards Phoebe. She looked around. The cats were bristling, and Madame Arpeggio whispered urgently without turning round, "Hide, my dear, quickly, before one of the beetles winds it back." Phoebe didn't need telling twice. The Tin Man had clearly identified her. She took a couple of steps back, then, head down, she skirted past other groups of musicians before glancing over her shoulder. A copper-coloured beetle had whirred past Madame Arpeggio and landed on the motionless Tin Man's shoulder. It scuttled up its neck and disappeared into the small ear-like opening in the side of the head. A clicking sound began as the beetle wound up the mechanism inside, growing louder and louder, and the Tin Man's eyes started to flicker into life. This is the Tin Man becoming motionless and sort of shutting down. Phoebe had only a few moments to hide. Desperately, she looked around and spotted a timber wagon covered in oilcloth close by. Without pausing to think, she grabbed a rope, pulled herself up, and disappeared into the darkness under the cloth. Phoebe found herself pressed against the bark of a large tree trunk. It felt rough against her face and fingers, and the instrument case almost slipped from her grasp as the cello inside quivered. Immediately, sounds flooded Phoebe's head in the darkness. The wind rustling leaves, the creak of branches, the soft whisper of sap rising from roots. Beneath her, the tree trunk seemed to sway and pulse as if remembering the distant part of the great wood it came from. Phoebe lay very still and listened. The tree that this trunk had once been part of was very old. It wasn't the oldest tree in the great wood. There were older ones, full of tree magic from their roots to the tips of their tallest branches, but it was the oldest. It was older than most. The tree knew many things. Even now it felt the deep wood around it and far beyond. It felt the footfalls of forest creatures and the footfalls of others. It knew of the great cities and the comings and goings in all of Thrine, like whispers on the wind or the coming of rain. It stood and grew and listened and knew. Thoughts rippled through the tree on into the very heart of the great wood and where the forever tree grew. Phoebe's head was swimming. Her face rested against the bark of the tree and felt as though it glowed with its warmth. Outside, the Tin Men were marching, and the wagons jolted back and forth as the animals pulling them shifted from foot to foot, rattling their harnesses. Phoebe wasn't aware of any of this. Her head filled with the tree's memories as she pressed her cheek against the bark. The forever tree was tall and strong and drew all the magic of the great wood up through its roots and into its branches. High in the uppermost branches, where the leaves budded fresh and green, was the nest, and in the nest were eggs. The sound of the bands tuning up brought Phoebe back from the strange dream. She opened her eyes. It was pitch black beneath the oilcloth, and she reached out and pulled a corner aside. The Tin Man had moved on, and the coast seemed to be clear. She knew she couldn't stay in the wagon. As soon as the oilcloth was removed, she would be caught. She started to form a plan. And that's Phoebe resting on the bark of the tree. Now I want you to think about her dream. She dreamt of the forever tree, and she dreamt of the high branches and the nests. Now, if you remember way back when we read the introduction, what were those nests? What did those eggs contain in those nests? What kind of eggs were they? The last place the Tin Men would expect her to be was back with the cat orchestra, so for now that was the safest place she could go. Slowly she eased herself out from under the oilcloth and climbed down from the wagon as the music began. There was the sound of a whip cracking, and the wagon trundled forward, but not before Phoebe had ducked into the rows of musicians and headed off towards the cat orchestra. And that is the end of chapter 10. So really short chapter. It basically talks about how she managed to escape and hide in the wagons with a bark from a magical tree, and where she dreamt of the tree's magic. And it just gives us a little bit of an idea of what the magic of the trees is all about. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this short chapter, chapter 10. Stay tuned for chapter 11 very soon. Have a lovely day, guys. Bye.